Danny Kavanagh and Liam O'Shea, two names once whispered in the shadows of Liverpool's docks, rose from poverty and violence to rule the city's underworld, rewriting its fate through loyalty, betrayal, and blood. What began as friendship forged in desperation would evolve into a legacy of power that shaped a generation, proving that in Liverpool's gang streets, fear was only the beginning. Liverpool in the early 1990s was a city trapped in a strange silence. The once busy docks, which had fed generations, now stood abandoned, their cranes rusted and lifeless against the gray sky. Empty warehouses lined the waterfront like forgotten soldiers, each one whispering stories of a past when ships from all over the world brought life to the city. But that era was gone. The heartbeat of Liverpool had slowed, replaced by unemployment, crumbling buildings, and streets that seemed to belong more to survival than to hope. The young and restless filled the void left behind by lost industries. They gathered in corners, in broken houses, in pubs where the lights never seemed to work. Most had grown up watching their parents struggle, their schools shut down, and their neighborhoods decay. With few opportunities and even fewer dreams, some found comfort in power, or at least the illusion of it. The rules of the streets became stronger than the rules of the law. Respect wasn't earned through education or hard work anymore. It was demanded through fear, through control, and through a willingness to do what others couldn't. Police patrols became routine sights, yet their presence did little to change the mood. The people of the city had learned to keep their eyes down and their mouths shut. Crimes went unreported, and those who dared to speak often disappeared into the shadows of the night. The streets were loud with music, laughter, and anger, but underneath it all there was tension, a feeling that something dark was waiting to take over. It began small, almost invisible. A stolen radio here, a mugging there. Then came drug dealing in alleyways, protection money demanded from shop owners, and mysterious fires that insurance couldn't explain. Teenagers barely out of school started driving cars they could never afford. Money flowed, but no one asked where it came from. Everyone knew, and no one wanted to know. In this chaos, the first real signs of organized control started to form. The older generation of criminals had grown cautious, hiding behind bars, businesses, and fake respectability. But the new wave, younger, sharper, angrier, had no such patience. They wanted the streets, the money, and the name that came with it. Liverpool became a breeding ground for small gangs, each trying to carve out its own piece of territory. Fights broke out over postcodes, over insults, and sometimes over nothing at all. What made it worse was the desperation. There was no grand cause, no dream of riches that lasted. It was survival, pure and simple. Those who showed weakness were forgotten. Those who showed strength became legends overnight. Parents locked their doors earlier. Children learned to walk home fast, eyes fixed on the pavement. The city that once sang with football chants and dock workers' laughter now whispered with rumors of gangs, drugs, and guns. No one knew it yet, but the foundations were being laid for a storm that would redefine the city. In the forgotten corners of Liverpool, where poverty met pride and loyalty mixed with fear, the seeds of power were being planted, and soon, the entire city would feel their roots spreading, deep, dark, and unstoppable. In the middle of Toxteth, where old brick houses leaned into narrow streets, and graffiti covered the walls like badges of survival, 6 young men decided they had nothing left to lose. They were barely in their 20s, raised in a world that had already forgotten them. Their names were whispered more out of curiosity than fear at first, but that would soon change. They called themselves the Dockside Crew, a name born from the very docks that had once fed the city and now stood as silent witnesses to its decay. What began as an idea between friends quickly turned into a movement of control, loyalty, and ambition. The group started small. They knew the city's old dockyards better than anyone. The tunnels, the storage rooms, the back entrances no longer watched. It began with petty smuggling, stolen electronics, alcohol, and car parts that fell off trucks. They sold what they could to local markets, splitting the money evenly. The first taste of profit changed everything. For the first time, they felt untouchable. The police didn't see them as a threat yet, and the older criminals dismissed them as kids playing grown-up games. That mistake gave the dockside crew the space they needed to grow. They were disciplined, almost professional in their rise. Every move was planned, every risk calculated. Danny Kavanagh, known as Red for his fiery hair and temper, became their leader. He had the vision and the charisma to unite them. Liam O'Shea, clever and quiet, handled the logistics and money. The others played their roles: enforcers, drivers, lookouts, each one bound by loyalty and fear of letting the others down. They weren't just friends anymore. They were a brotherhood built on trust and the thrill of danger. Within a year, the dockside crew controlled the flow of stolen goods across half the city. Their reputation grew with every successful deal. Local businesses started to notice them. Some willingly paid for protection, others were forced to. The more they earned, the more they invested. They began dealing in drugs, small at first, then expanding to larger shipments that came through the docks under the radar. Their network stretched from the warehouses of Liverpool to clubs in Manchester and beyond. They had one rule that kept them alive: no betrayal, no talking. Breaking that rule meant disappearing. It was that cold loyalty that made them different. They didn't see themselves as criminals. They saw themselves as survivors rewriting the city's rules. To them, the streets were fair game, and power belonged to those brave enough to take it. But their growing influence didn't go unnoticed. Older gangs, long used to controlling the city's underworld, began to see the dockside crew as a threat. Yet for now, no one dared to challenge them openly. They were too unpredictable, too organized, and too fast. Their rise was like fire spreading through dry grass, impossible to stop, and dangerous to ignore. By the mid-1990s, Liverpool's docklands had become their empire. The same streets that once held the echoes of ship horns now carried whispers of the dockside crew, a group of young men who turned broken dreams into a new kind of power. What they didn't know was that their success would draw enemies from places far darker than they could ever imagine. As the dockside crew tightened their grip on Liverpool's underworld, a new shadow began to creep into their empire. From the northern edges of the city came whispers of another force. One older, colder, and far more ruthless. They called themselves the Iron Dogs, a gang that had long ruled the North Docks with silent authority. Unlike the dockside crew, who rose from poverty and chaos, the Iron Dogs were professionals. They had structure, money, and connections that reached far beyond Liverpool. Their leader, a man known only as Mackie, had built his reputation on fear and precision. No one knew his real name or where he came from, but everyone knew what happened to those who crossed him. The first sign of trouble appeared quietly. A shipment of drugs. The dockside crew had arranged through Dublin vanished before it reached the city. A few days later, a warehouse they used for storage was found burning, the air thick with smoke and silence. It was more than a warning. It was a message that someone new was staking a claim. Danny Red Kavanagh, once so confident, began to sense that the game had changed. The streets that had once bowed to him were now split in loyalty, with whispers spreading faster than he could stop them. The Iron Dogs operated differently. They didn't rely on flashy violence or open threats. They used precision and information. Mackie's men infiltrated the supply routes, bribed port workers, and bought the loyalty of those who had once worked for the dockside crew. Their weapons came from Ireland, their money from London, and their orders from Mackie's unseen circle. Where the dockside crew ruled by fear and loyalty, the Iron Dogs ruled by efficiency and control. Tension began to build like a storm waiting to break. Every street, every pub, every warehouse had eyes watching. Liverpool turned into a city divided, north against south, power against pride. The dockside crew refused to back down. Danny saw the Iron Dogs as outsiders, invaders trying to steal what his crew had built from nothing. For weeks, small skirmishes erupted in backstreets and bars. Men were beaten, some went missing, and others were found in the river. Each attack was answered with another, but the Iron Dogs always seemed one step ahead, as if they knew what was coming before it happened. The police began to take notice of the violence, but no one talked. Fear ruled both sides of the law. For the people living in the middle of it all, it was like watching two storms collide. Normal life went on. Buses still ran, shops still opened, but under the surface, the city was boiling. Then came the night that changed everything. A van carrying the dockside crew's latest shipment was ambushed near the old dock road. The attackers left behind nothing but broken glass and blood on the pavement. It was the moment everyone realized that a full-blown war had begun. The Iron Dogs weren't just rivals, they were predators. And for the first time, the dockside crew felt fear creeping into their empire. What had started as a rise to power was now turning into a fight for survival. The city of Liverpool, already divided by poverty and pride, was about to be torn apart by a war no one could control. Inside the dockside crew, the air grew thick with suspicion and doubt. What had once been a tight brotherhood was slowly unraveling under the weight of greed, pressure, and paranoia. The gang's rise had brought them power, money, and recognition, but it had also drawn enemies, not just from the outside, but from within. Danny Red Kavanagh tried to keep the crew together, but leadership had turned from strength into burden. Every failed deal, every lost shipment, felt heavier than the last, and while Danny still dreamed of expanding their empire, one of his own men was quietly plotting its downfall. Ryan, the youngest member of the group, had always been different. Ambitious, quiet, and observant. He watched how the gang operated and learned quickly. He was trusted with errands, collections, and sometimes even the handling of new deals. But as the Iron Dogs began tightening their grip on the city, Ryan saw something the others didn't: opportunity. While the rest of the crew focused on defending their turf, Ryan secretly reached out to Mackey's men. In his mind, loyalty had an expiration date, and survival meant knowing when to switch sides. The Iron Dogs promised him money, status, and protection. All he had to do was feed them information, small details at first, an entire operation. The first betrayal went unnoticed. A planned drug exchange at the docks was intercepted by police before it even began. The crew blamed bad luck. The second time, one of their warehouses was raided by masked men who stole everything and vanished without a trace. Whispers began to circulate. Someone was talking, but no one could prove it. Danny grew restless, convinced there was a traitor among them, yet too blinded by anger to see that it was someone sitting right beside him. The tension boiled over after a major deal went catastrophically wrong. The crew had arranged a nighttime exchange involving thousands of pounds worth of cocaine, hidden in containers near the old shipyard. What they didn't know was that the police were waiting. Sirens echoed through the docks as officers surrounded the area. Panic erupted, shots were fired. 2 members of the dockside crew were killed instantly. One was captured, and the rest scattered into the dark streets. It was the worst night in the crew's history, and it was all because of Ryan's tip-off to the Iron Dogs. After the chaos, the gang was broken. Their fear of betrayal grew stronger than their loyalty to each other. Old friendships turned into silent accusations. Meetings became shorter, plans more desperate. Danny tried to rebuild, but every move felt doomed before it began. The police now had names, routes, and evidence that only an insider could have provided. Ryan's secret meetings with the Iron Dogs continued in the shadows, each one pulling him deeper into a world he couldn't escape. But betrayal is a dangerous game. What Ryan didn't realize was that the same people he served would soon use him as a pawn, and when his usefulness ran out, his story would end the same way as those he betrayed, in silence, under the cold lights of Liverpool's docks. By 1997, the dockside crew was no longer the dominant force it once was. The streets that once echoed with their power now whispered of their decline. Police surveillance, betrayals, and mounting internal chaos had shattered the unity that once defined them. Their empire, built on fear and loyalty, was cracking from the inside out. The final blow came not from rivals or the law, but from the quiet, calculated betrayal of Ryan, the man who had sold them out piece by piece. What had started as small leaks of information turned into a full-scale collapse. The police operation known as Night Tide began in complete secrecy. Months of undercover work, wiretaps and anonymous tips gave detectives everything they needed to strike. Officers moved silently through Liverpool's underworld, mapping every transaction, every hidden warehouse, and every meeting spot the dockside crew used. They didn't rush, they waited, watching as the gang unknowingly dug their own graves. Danny Red Kavanagh, still trying to rebuild what remained of his power, became their primary target. He had no idea how deeply they had infiltrated his world. The turning point came on a cold November night, when police raided multiple locations across the city. Flashing blue lights tore through the darkness as armored vans swarmed the docks. The sound of boots against concrete and the crash of breaking doors marked the end of an era. Danny was dragged from a flat in Toxteth, half asleep and confused, surrounded by officers who knew every secret he thought was buried. Within hours, nearly every surviving member of the dockside crew was in custody. Their homes were searched, their money seized, and their reputations destroyed. For the people of Liverpool, it felt like justice had finally arrived. For the gang, it was betrayal made real. Inside the interrogation rooms, faces once filled with pride were now hollow with fear. Some broke down and confessed, others stayed silent. Ryan, meanwhile, had already disappeared, protected for a time by the Iron Dogs, who used his betrayal to wipe out their competition without lifting a finger. What he didn't realize was that to them, he was disposable. The moment the dockside crew was gone, Ryan's usefulness ended. As weeks passed, trials began. Newspapers filled their front pages with headlines about Liverpool's biggest gang takedown in decades. Danny was sentenced to years behind bars, his empire dissolved, his name turned into a warning for anyone dreaming of power. The city that had once bowed to him now spoke of him only in hushed tones, as a ghost from another time. But even behind prison walls, Danny refused to give up the only thing he had left, his pride. He never named names, never admitted defeat. The dockside crew was gone, yet the legend began to grow. People whispered about hidden money, about allies waiting for his release, about revenge. The law may have ended their reign, but in the hearts of those who once followed them, the story of the dockside crew was far from over. What no one realized then was that their fall had opened the door for a new kind of power to rise, one that would reshape the city in ways far more subtle and dangerous. When the dust of the police raids settled and the courtrooms fell silent, only one man from the dockside crew remained untouched. Liam O'Shea. He had always been the quiet one, more observer than fighter, the kind of man who calculated every move before taking it. While Danny Kavanagh faced trial and the rest of the crew scattered or vanished, Liam disappeared completely. Rumors said he had fled the country. Others claimed he was hiding somewhere along the coast, living under a new name. The truth was simpler. He was watching, waiting for the right moment to return. For 3 years Liam stayed invisible, using old contacts and new ideas to build a life away from the chaos. He studied the way crime had evolved, no longer through street wars and visible violence, but through business, investments and influence. The world was changing, and he understood something the others never did. The future of power wasn't in fear alone, it was in control without attention. By the time he returned to Liverpool in the early 2000s, the city had changed too. Shiny new buildings stood where warehouses once rotted, and the docks had become a symbol of rebirth. But beneath the polished surface, the same hunger for control remained. Liam began small, just as before. He invested in nightclubs, car washes and private security companies, businesses that offered the perfect cover for laundering money. He didn't deal in stolen goods or drugs directly anymore. Instead, he controlled those who did. Every nightclub became a meeting ground, every security firm a shield for his network. He learned to move silently through the world of legitimate business while keeping one foot in the shadows. To the public, He was a successful entrepreneur. To those who knew the streets, he was something far more dangerous, the man who had turned crime into enterprise. What set Liam apart was his patience. He didn't seek revenge for the fall of the dockside crew, nor did he try to rebuild it. He understood that power could take many forms, and the smartest way to rule was to appear harmless. He used his connections to buy influence, a few politicians, some police officers, and a network of loyal men who remembered what he'd done for them in the old days. Slowly, quietly, his reach extended beyond the streets and into the city's systems. By 2005, Liam had become a ghost with a fortune. The police couldn't touch him. There was nothing illegal on paper, yet everyone who mattered knew that his businesses ran deeper than they looked. Even the iron dogs, once feared and dominant, began to fade from relevance. Their kind of violence no longer worked in a world run by contracts and corporate fronts. Liam didn't need guns to win, he had influence, and that was far more lethal. He started attending charity galas, donating to local causes, appearing in photographs with city leaders. People saw a businessman giving back to his community, unaware that the same man had once ruled the city through fear. Liverpool's underworld had evolved, and Liam O'Shea stood at its center, wearing a suit instead of a leather jacket, speaking in boardrooms instead of alleys. He had learned the ultimate lesson: in a city built on survival, the most powerful man is the one who no longer looks like a criminal at all. Years had passed since the dockside crew vanished from the streets, but Liverpool had a way of keeping its ghosts alive. By the late 2000s, the story of the gang had become urban folklore, whispered in pubs, passed down like a warning, and half believed by a new generation who only knew the city's cleaner modern face. Yet beneath the glittering skyline and bustling nightlife, the past was not buried. It waited patiently, and when it resurfaced, it did so through a woman determined to uncover the truth. Her name was Claire Morton, a journalist known for chasing stories others were too afraid to touch. Claire had grown up near the docks, hearing the rumors of the dockside crew and the violence that shaped her childhood streets. For her, this was more than just an investigation. It was a search for answers about the city's soul. Old police records led her to cold cases that were never solved. Disappearances, murders, and one particularly suspicious death that had been written off as an accident. The deeper she dug, the more the threads began to lead back to one man: Ryan, the former member who had betrayed his own. His name had vanished from all official documents, replaced by false identities and incomplete files. But to Claire, that only made the mystery more compelling. Her investigation took her into the city's underbelly. Bars once owned by the dockside crew, warehouses now repurposed into clubs, and aging dockworkers who still remembered the old days. Piece by piece she uncovered how Ryan had survived by working under new names, and how his betrayal had been rewarded by the iron dogs. But as she connected the dots, she began to see something else. Signs that Ryan hadn't escaped his past as cleanly as he thought. Rumors suggested that Liam O'Shea, now a respected businessman, had quietly been keeping tabs on him. There were whispers of blackmail, of threats hidden behind polite conversations, of debts that could never truly be repaid. Claire's article draft was explosive. It linked Liam's business empire to money once traced to gang activities, and it revealed Ryan's role in the downfall of the dockside crew. But before she could publish, Ryan disappeared. He had agreed to meet her for an interview one evening near the old docks, the same place where everything had started decades earlier, but he never arrived. 2 days later, his body was found washed up by the waterfront. The police called it suicide. Claire didn't believe them. The timing was too perfect, the details too clean. The coroner's report offered no clear answers, only more questions. In the weeks that followed, Claire began receiving anonymous messages warning her to stop digging. She knew she had touched something dangerous, something powerful that still controlled the city's silence. As she stood by the river, where Ryan's story ended, she realized that the old world hadn't disappeared. It had only changed its face. The same hands that once ruled the streets through guns, now ruled through money and influence. And somewhere in the city's polished skyline, Liam O'Shea watched as the past was buried once more, one secret at a time. By the time the 2010s arrived, Liverpool had transformed into a city of progress and pride. The docks that once echoed with the sounds of smuggling and violence now shimmered with lights from luxury apartments and restaurants. Tourists walked the same streets where, decades earlier, men had fought for control of the city's underworld. To outsiders, Liverpool had healed, but those who had lived through its darker years knew that power doesn't disappear, it simply changes shape. Beneath the surface of wealth and redevelopment, the same invisible network still existed, only now, they wore suits instead of scars. Liam O'Shea had mastered the art of invisibility. Once a streetwise smuggler, he was now a polished businessman, whose name appeared in charity programs and property boards. His photo hung beside politicians, his donations funded youth centers, and his companies provided jobs across the city. To the public, he was a symbol of Liverpool's renewal, a man who had turned his life around. But those who truly understood the city's history saw through the illusion. The dockside crew's legacy hadn't vanished, it had evolved through Liam's quiet empire. The same docks that once hid illegal cargo now hid the flow of untaxed money and discreet transactions that no one dared to question. The power Liam held was different now, quieter, cleaner, but far more dangerous. He had learned that control through fear attracted attention, but control through respect lasted longer. Politicians owed him favors, businessmen sought his partnerships, and even former law enforcers found themselves working security for his firms. Every decision, every deal, passed through invisible strings that led back to him. He never needed to threaten anyone anymore. His influence was enough. Those who stood against him simply found their projects unfunded, their permits delayed, or their names quietly erased from opportunity. Yet, as much as he had buried the past, it never stopped following him. Whispers of Ryan's death still floated through the underworld. Some said it was revenge. Others claimed it was necessary to protect Liam's new image. The police reopened the case briefly after journalist Claire Morton's investigation, but nothing came of it. Evidence went missing. Witnesses changed their statements, and soon the city moved on. Claire, realizing the limits of justice, published a watered-down version of her story, one that told the truth without naming names. Behind closed doors, she knew Liam had won. Years later, when Liam stood at a charity gala overlooking the very docks where his empire began, he smiled at the irony. The city that once feared him now celebrated him. Every hand he shook, every compliment he received, was proof of how completely he had rewritten his own story. The crowd saw a successful man. He saw survivor. Liverpool's streets were cleaner now, its crime more hidden, but its soul remained the same, a city built on power, pride, and survival. The names had changed, the faces had grown older, but the game continued. From fear had come power, and from power came silence. The dockside crew was gone, yet its spirit lived on in every quiet deal, every unspoken favor, and every dark corner where ambition still whispered. In the end, Liverpool had not escaped its past. It had simply learned to wear it with a smile.